So once again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us, and particularly for our three panelists. I know in our conversations here in Parker Dewey with universities, with nonprofit organizations, with companies, every single day there's a lot of interest, particularly now in this COVID environment, around how can we utilize these micro-internships, short-term professional projects to engage students. If you're working for a university, how do you help your students? Everyone's eager for that. If you're a small business owner, how can you get help that you need and make it as easy as possible, because we all have way more on our plate than what we used to have, perhaps. And the next and biggest success story that we've had particularly over the past 9 months or so has been in Cincinnati, Ohio. And as a fellow resident, or previous person from Cincinnati, ironically, I was just really excited to have this opportunity to bring 3 of the key players together and just to have this great conversation. For those of you who are interested in replicating what has been going on in the Queen City, really excited to just invite and welcome you all for today. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Feel free, my colleague Michelle is standing by in the chat, and we also have our founder here on the line as well, Jeffrey Moss, but keep Michelle busy with the chat. Whatever questions that you have, we'll entertain those. Got some questions already lined up as well for our panelists. And my name is Kristin Schrader too, if you didn't catch that in the beginning. And so I'm really excited to hear a little bit more from the 3 panelists. So without any further ado, I'd love to just have each of our panelists introduce themselves. So Paula, if you could kick us off and share a little bit about what your work is in Cincinnati, and also a little bit of the history of what's going on at University of Cincinnati from a co-op standpoint.
Sure. So I'm the manager of partnership development for our newly developed service learning co-op program. This is a pilot program that was started in the summer of last year. And it was a way of creating paid experiences for students that are not served by our traditional co-op program, which is primarily for our computing students and our engineering and design students. So mostly it's for our arts and sciences majors that struggle to find internship and paid experiences.
Great. And of course, University of Cincinnati has a very proud history in the co-op world. For those who may not be aware of that, would you mind just sharing just a tad bit about that before we introduce our other 2 panelists?
Sure. We call ourselves the birthplace of co-op, since that learning model was created by one of our professors many, many years ago in 1906. So that was his brainchild, and we've been doing it ever since, and it's been very successful. I think we were ranked #1 among public universities and #3 nationwide.
Awesome. Great. Well, one of the direct beneficiaries of that co-op legacy is actually here joining us as well. So Teja, would you mind sharing us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Teja Bollimunta. I'm actually a 4th-year chemical engineering and industrial management student at the University of Cincinnati. And I'm also the CEO and founder of Brainwave. I don't know if you can see the background here. But yeah, so a little bit about Brainwave. We are a nonprofit organization that really started during the pandemic. And one of our biggest things is to be able to remove barriers that could have been caused. So we initially started off as a nonprofit tutoring organization, and we provided free tutoring services online. And we started to expand, and I've actually met Paula, and then we actually worked into the consulting space and providing pro bono consulting for small local businesses. So yeah, and thank you for having me today.
No, we're really excited to have you and hear that perspective, both from a recent founder of a nonprofit, of course, and then now as a student as well. But you mentioned local small business, and that's a perfect segue to our 3rd panelist. So, Carl, if you could also share a bit about what you do with CincyTech.
All right, so thank you. I'm Carl Labanz. I work with CincyTech. I manage all the student and university relations and engagement that we do, with the core part of that being developing sort of what you guys call micro-internships. We've been calling project work, but essentially the exact same thing, and building out a model where our companies, so CincyTech, were founded in 2006, first funded around 2007. We are a seed stage investor, public-private partnership. And so simply venture capital, about 30 companies in our startup portfolio, with a focus on human health and digital companies. So with that, we wanted to build a model where we can really connect our companies to students to do project work, sort of on an on-demand, as-needed basis to really support and increase their bandwidth.
Awesome. And could you just elaborate a little bit, given your role working with students, what are some of the recruitment-related challenges that you face with these small companies trying to connect with students? Internships in the large sense may or may not be the best fit. So could you elaborate a little bit on what you're seeing?
Yeah, so on that, I think there's maybe three distinct points. One is we don't really have cyclical hires as much as a big company. So it's sort of on demand. So for example, like real prestigious internship programs right now are recruiting students for the summer, whereas our companies are still focused on what do they need now this fall, maybe early spring, right? As well as the specific needs of each company vary. So where again, with a big company, you might have, they're filling the marketing internship every single cycle. Our needs, they're sort of tailored to what the company needs at that moment in time. So by our nature, and then thirdly, by our nature, sort of us as a VC and our current companies, startups, we don't have a huge brand footprint. They're seed stage startups. So while they might be companies that can become the next big thing, they're not yet the next big thing that everyone knows. And so there's a brand recognition challenge there that, whereas a student might be, I can go get a big company name on my resume and that's going to be a career accelerant. And startups companies, while we have a lot of that opportunity for growth, can be pretty huge. There's a risk factor there. So we're really also working on that brand recognition. And so we want to also become a career accelerant for any student who is interested in sort of the innovation economy, startup economy here in Cincinnati.
Right, and innovation economy in Cincinnati, those aren't words that necessarily you'd see come together, but you guys are all proof that that concept really actually is a thing, and a thing that theoretically could be in any city, because there's interesting and fun work going on all across the country. Paula, I'd love to hear your perspective, though, working with a variety of different companies of all sizes and nonprofit organizations and the like. So could you talk a little bit about your experience has been and where micro-internships fit in from supporting students, but also for companies in their recruitment efforts?
Right. So traditionally, I have always worked with the academic internship program before I worked with the service learning co-op program. And well, the co-op program has, like he was saying, the cyclical, they know that they're going to have a student every other semester. And so the challenge with internship program is that, like he said, it's on-demand hiring. And a lot of times companies aren't able to take on an intern they don't have a project that's going to last a whole semester. And so a lot of companies balk at taking on an intern. So having a bite-size, smaller project is an easier sell. And so I know from working with students that once they get in the door and an employer sees what our students can do, that they'll be hooked. And so I think the micro-internships are a great way to do that.
Awesome.
And I think once the student gets that experience,
That's okay.
They can parlay that small internship into they can use that on their resume to get the next big one. I apologize. I have a dog that's on heart medication and a diuretic. And then when she needs to go out, she has to go out like now. I knew she would do this. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. No worries, Paula. And one point I'm really, really glad that Paula brought up was nothing to do with the dog, was the fact that that students need this opportunity to shine. And particularly with what we faced last summer, so many students were really, really hurting to find experience and basically missed out on the summer of 2020. Teja, I know that does not fit you. You were one of the lucky ones that had a really great experience, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, how, given your peers, given just everything that's been going on from a student's world, where and how are micro-internships able to help students? And how does that all fit into career planning at the kind of latter part, junior, senior year?
Yeah, for sure. And I really feel like one of the biggest things that, especially in the Cincinnati culture, has been ingrained is the value of that experience and really being able to apply what you're learning in class to a real world application. And that's what we've really seen from a lot of the students and a lot of the interns who are participating in the micro internships, is that they're able to use some of those things that they've been able to learn in class and actually apply them and actually see an impact, at some of these small local businesses. And especially in a time where some of these businesses are struggling because of the complications of the pandemic, they've really been able to see that direct impact. And all of us are really happy to see that.
Absolutely. Now, Carl, there's a question that just came through that I think you could really address here is the typical duration of a micro internship. From your experience, you've seen dozens that have come through the Cincinnati Tech or the CincyTech overhead. So what are the typical durations? I know you've, again, seen a variety. And then what kinds of projects are the students typically working on?
Okay, so we've actually done, I think between us and some of our companies have done about 50, a little bit over 50 projects just this year. And those I have some as short as 5 hours and others as long as 40 or 50 hours, or ones that are more like repeat projects. Every month we want a few hours so that you work on this and we might roll it over type of thing. So it really can depend on lengthwise. So yeah, so 5 hours being about the shortest I've done, 40 hours being about the longest. But it sort of also depends on the type of work. So that 5 hour project, for example, of a project we've done was, I just actually did about 5 of them. I had 5 different students. I gave them a topic. I want some high level demographic data. I want some high level spending in this industry data. I want some, here's chunks of data, just go pull it for me. And then we will then sift through it a bit and decide where do we want to focus our energy. 5 hours, here and some money to do it. So not a time intensive project. But also so short project that. On a longer project, a more substantive project, we had one student do a website refresh. They basically did like, let me review your website, look at competitors, and then proposing to change it. And she was also a design student, so she then was able to offer design suggestions. And that same student has done multiple projects along that lines of doing pitch deck design, some website suggestions, things like that. Then a recurring project, for example, that we've done is our Instagram is actually managed by students, and we have that recurring where we have a student sort of re-up that every month. Okay, we want X number of hours where you dedicate to our Instagram for us.
Those are great. And what I really liked about your response too, Carl, is just the flexibility that you emphasized, because you had some students that were doing longer scale projects because that was what was needed. Others that are doing bite-sized chunks, but maybe multiple students doing that. And so just from a smaller organization perspective, that is a really, really big thing, is just to have lots of different options for how to implement this. Now, Paula, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, if you don't mind doing it, like that flexibility, that this, at least for the companies that we work with, for us and our companies is important. And one reason why, like, I'm looking for research and social media design skills for whatever the project is, I'm also really curiosity, eagerness, and work ethic, because the startups, the products have changed. I've had a project where the product that the person was working on changed mid project. And that particular one, the student wasn't quite adaptive enough, right? So that project, we could have done a little bit better at managing it. Whereas other students, okay, it shifted and then they've adapted. So I think that's sort of for startups at least, that's an important thing. Nimbleness and that flexibility is really important for the students.
Right. Well, that's the way of the workforce now. We all are having to take on extra projects, do different things, go outside of our comfort zone. And yep, some of us are a little bit more adept at that than others, just like students, but that's a really important skill set that we as educators can do. And then we as business owners and just anybody who's working directly with students, just how can we coach and direct them? Now, Paula, your program is a little bit different in terms of how it's structured. So could you outline a little bit for us about like the duration of the projects and kind of the typical projects that you're seeing and managing with the Survey program?
Right. So UC was awarded a tech-focused grant last summer, and it has several initiatives, but one of them is to support nonprofits with 80-hour tech-based projects. And so those projects have been preset at 80 hours. So students can work one 80-hour project for a nonprofit on a tech-based project. And so several of our nonprofit partners aren't able to put students on a payroll because they're so small, they don't have one. And so Parker Dewey has been an amazing partner in that regard because, and I think Teja is one of the people that we've worked with for that Parker Dewey will pay the students for them and act as their fiscal agent. So it's been really a good partnership for us.
Thank you. And could you elaborate a little bit on some of the projects too that students are working on and kind of where those ideas came from and what does an 80-hour project look like?
Right. Well, since it's a tech-focused grant, all of the projects have to have a tech component. And so some of the things that students have done have been doing the web design, redesign, refresh, update. We've had students do database work. We've actually had a team of students work on a development of an application. We've had online learning modules created. I'm forgetting one. Social media management, and then basic analytics. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. And what's also nice too is, yeah, you can have the fiscal agent and take care of the payroll piece, the administrative, the legal, and all of that. So that's just one less thing anybody has to worry about. But also just a variety of projects, that you both have described, both you and Carl, is just sharing that any company that needs that kind of help, you're not starting from scratch. Those projects been there, done that, and very easy from us and our perspective to recreate for your organization so that, we can get that up and running. We have the descriptions and durations and so on, can provide all of that extra support for any new organization that just needs that kind of assistance. And Teja, too, we haven't discussed a little bit about the projects that you've had folks working on. So could you elaborate a little bit on what that looked like? And just from your perspective of actually being boots on the ground, you're doing school, you're doing this nonprofit, you don't have a lot of spare time, I would imagine. So where did this micro-internship concept fit in and I guess alleviate some of that burden from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things was, really running a business. I feel like there's a lot of different steps that really need to be taken to kind of get started up. And once Paula had informed us about Parker Dewey, I think one of the biggest things was we were able to take care of a lot of those issues, right? Being able to get people on payroll, a lot of legal things. A lot of that was handled by Parker Dewey, which is a great way for us to actually be able to focus on our clients and actually be able to work with them and really see what we want to be able to do with them, and how we can kind of accelerate them. And I think that was one of the biggest assets for us for rapid launch. We've only been in the works for about 5 months. And so far we've had about 5 clients, and we've all worked on a variety of projects. So one of them is the social media management, where they even actually did the design and editing of the pictures. Also, on the styling standpoint of that, one of our partners is actually a company called Denim Rush, which is a clothing line. We've worked with a partner called Kombucha Natty. That was a startup as well, and they provide kombucha, and they were able to help provide more process improvement techniques, while also being able to create production schedules and lots of different things. So they're really able to see their education really be able to translate into effective goals. And I think that's something that, from a student standpoint, from a lot of my internships as well, I think that's something that I like to see is, the results and actually to see something.
Yeah, absolutely. With every micro-internship, there is a discrete deliverable that the students can walk away with, can put on their resume, LinkedIn profile, whatever the case may be, and take to that longer-term experience, an internship, a full-time job. That's what we ultimately want, is get on with whatever longer-term experiences, go get a full-time job when all is said and done. And, hopefully this can be a pathway for lots of folks. Carl, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your experience with selecting students, 50 some odd projects, and you have this affinity for Cincinnati students. So could you walk me through a little bit of what value you see in terms of hiring local and choosing from these local universities?
That's actually something that I spoke with Jeffrey a lot when we first started getting spun up with Parker Dewey, and he was supportive of helping us. How can we use it for our need? And so why hiring local is important for us is so we are a hyper local venture capital. So we were founded here. and we have a mandate to operate here, Southwest Ohio specifically. And so our focus is really here. And the idea there is that expanding a little opportunity. So our folks have been bringing capital and expanding startup ideas and building startups, but also by expanding opportunity for the local talent and talent base to be a part of that, builds just a stronger talent pool, not just for our companies, but all the startups in the area, as well as, and as with the other big companies. It sort of builds a bit of that flywheel for the economic development, because again, that's core to who CincyTech is and how we were founded, was to build the economy up here, especially the high growth tech economy. So that spillover is what we're looking for. And if you think about a VC's time frame, where when we make an investment 5, 8, 10 years before we expect an exit, we really do see a long game. And so the students we work with today, 5 years, 8 years down the line, might be some of the first hires, or they might be crazy and go build their own startups. So as we give them the experiences with the startup community here, and they stay in this area, we're just hoping that, that might be the next new startup that we invest in 8, 10 years down the line.
No, I love that. And having grown up in Cincinnati, it is a wonderful place to be and to be raised. And it's just maybe not on everybody's radar. One thing I love about all three of your perspectives is the fact that you've got a lot of IT talent, a lot going on in Cincinnati. We're not talking about either coast. And so it really can show that this truly can happen anywhere. So
yeah.
that's please.
I think you also had a question about matching students specifically to individual projects.
Yeah, walk us through the process a little bit, if you would.
Okay, so we are we're doing a little bit differently than sort of the if you were to take Parker Dewey sort of just by itself, which is, okay, you guys have sort of a national talent pool. A big part of what I do is I go build relationships with the universities directly, and specifically with professors and students, and get them into sort of a pipeline of ourselves. So when have a new project, I have 100+ students who are interested in CincyTech or our startups and working on these types of projects. So they already have a little bit of a bent towards, okay, I'm interested in working with the startup. And those are who I'm going to first. Generally, if we need very specific skill set, or we're looking for, okay, one of our companies needs someone who's a little bit more experienced or so forth, then we're going directly to maybe a professor or career services who we've built relationships with. So we're really starting at the student level to bring them to our projects, rather than sort of just broadcasting them broadly. And that also goes back to why we focus locally as well with the universities here. And then when it does come time to pick a student for a specific project, generally I get more than one who are interested. And it's about what have they already, how have they been engaged with us, whether in the classroom or separately. So somebody who's been more engaged with us is more likely to, I'm going to know more about them, right? And I make a big effort to go and build those relationships individually with students or small groups of students. And then also, if they're working for one of our companies, and it's often one of the C-suite level people at a company, that person's going to give them a 5, 10, 15-minute phone call and say, hey, can I work with you? It's not going to be a full-blown interview like it is for an internship, but do we have good communication? Do you seem flexible enough? Again, that curiosity and eagerness and work ethic I talked about.
Mm-hmm. And everything you're describing is exactly what a typical university recruiter would do when they're trying to build a brand on campus. And you're doing it at this small business level, but building those relationships with faculty, building relationships with career services. I know I field questions all the time with the 400 or so organizations that we work with, mostly universities, about how can we engage our larger campus community. And so you're proof that those relationship building, that really does work with companies of all sizes. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. Paula, I'm curious to know, and I know a lot of folks here, you mentioned this grant that has really allowed this opportunity to connect with folks like Teja and everyone. How did you acquire that grant? Is there a way that some advice you could give for schools who are interested in pursuing something similar?
Yes, and I did not write the grant. I'm just carrying it out. So one of my colleagues, I guess, found the grant through the state of Ohio, spent a long time writing it. It's got many, many initiatives, and the purpose of it is to increase students studying technology, because that world is kind of blown up, especially now with the pandemic. So we actually got started a little bit ahead of time on that. because of that grant. And I think one of the reasons why we were selected to receive the grant is because our co-op program, the other impetus for the grant is to create an apprenticeship model. And our co-op program is just a seamless transition over into the apprenticeship program. It's pretty much identical.
And so where did micro-internships fit into that? Because your co-op program, very highly structured and, one semester on, one off, that kind of model. So how about these shorter term projects? Why did you decide to go that route?
So the grant actually has about 12 different initiatives. The monies are put into different buckets. And one of the buckets was to create opportunities, paid opportunities for non-co-op students, traditional co-op students, mostly arts and sciences majors, to incentivize arts and sciences majors to study technology in some way so that they would be more ready to enter the workforce, since every company and every position is going to be using technology, or if they're not already. And so practicing those skills with nonprofits and helping our nonprofit partners at the same time. I just think that was genius that my colleague wrote the grant that way. It's been so helpful for our students and for our nonprofit partners alike. And what's interesting is that once a student gets in the door of a nonprofit, the nonprofits can see how valuable those students are. And I'm hoping that when our funding maybe goes away, I hope it never does, we're going to continue to try to get that to support this program. But if it does, I just think that they've seen how helpful it is to have students work with them. I honestly think that they would try to budget for that going forward. It's been that successful. Students have been rehired using this grant funding.
Absolutely. And we've also seen that students have been rehired for shorter projects with some of these nonprofits. It's like once they understand how this works, and then it works well for longer term things that then they fund on their own.
Right. They wait patiently for that student to be available the next semester.
Absolutely. Paula, one thing that I thought was particularly insightful when you and I first met and discussed all of this is how you went about helping the students to identify these nonprofit organizations and really leaving it up to the students. Could you describe that process for us?
Yeah, so we already have several established partnerships, and one way to ensure that students were invested in actually accepting a position with a nonprofit, I would have them do the legwork. I'd let them tell me, what nonprofits are you interested in working for? What type of projects would you like to do for the nonprofit? And so once the student went away, thought about that for a while, and then came back and said, here's the nonprofits I'd like to work for. This is why. Here's the projects I'd like to do for them. It was just easy for me to approach the nonprofit and say, hey, I have a student that has expressed an interest in working with your organization. Here's what they would like to do for you. It just kind of made it easy for the nonprofit to look at that. It's kind of a gift. I kind of put it in their lap, and then they said, oh, and you're going to pay for the student to work for me? And it was just an easy ask. And so lots of students got placed that way.
Yeah, well, and I just love that from all perspectives, from the nonprofit association that puts them in, of course, it makes it easy for them to say yes, but also from the student's perspective in having them, forcing them to go out, network, identify, do that self-exploration to identify what exactly they think they want to get out of this experience, then go find a couple of organizations that could be a fit. Brilliant. So thank you. I really love your perspective on that. Teja, I'm curious to hear a little bit from your perspective about what sort of coaching, training, onboarding, when you're working directly with these students, what does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. And like one of the biggest things that we do when we work with our clients, especially before we kind of partner up with them, is, what are the things that, you really need help with? I think that's one of the biggest things, and really being able to identify what the problems are and how we can find the solutions to them. And we actually work very closely with our partners and clients to really be able to see what we want in a candidate. And once a lot of those things are very general things. You know, a lot of the students are just hardworking students, people who are willing to learn. And a lot of students, you know, this could be something that's completely out of their field. We had a pre-med student who worked on a digital marketing kind of internship. So in order to kind of be able to get some more experience and get some professional development skills in there. And one of the things that we do with our client is we actually have a little test that we give some of our interns, and essentially we base them off the test, and with the test we're able to see what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and we're actually able to develop them based off of their weaknesses, and also continue to praise them for their strengths and to bring to see what they bring to the table as well.
I love that, and particularly the fact that here you are a tech firm, but it doesn't have to be a tech major. Could you recall some of the different academic areas of the students? What are some of the majors of the students that you've worked with?
Yeah, so we had a medical sciences student who worked in the design space. We had a allied health sciences student work in that space, a biomedical engineering student, several. I think we've had a student from every major, or every college, sorry, not every major, but every college, but CCM, our music school, participate in an internship through Brainwave. So.
That's awesome. Carl, what has your experience been? I saw you go off mute here.
So, I mean, I think I kind of want to steal some of Teja's students there. But I've also had like a biomedical engineering dual market research project. We've had communication students and so forth. I love helping students who are in different majors figure out projects that they can do, especially from liberal arts and arts and sciences when I can, because when I talk about like research skill, I was a history major, and so I think that a lot of people as students, they tend to not necessarily see where the applicability of their skills that they learn in class can be applied to even in the business setting. So, I mean, for history, for example, I mean, the research that you learn, understanding cause and effect, making an argument, even for a little bit of forecasting that you learn, right, to do, I mean, are great skills that I want to create projects when I can, like for specifically just to give them the opportunity. But on the delegation side, I think Paula had said something about like how great it is when students go and they create the project, she hands it to the nonprofits, and that they get excited because you just gave them a project that they can do and they didn't even have to think about it. And that's sort of the big challenge that I see with our startups is they know they have projects, but delegation is itself a to-do. So if you're saying we're going to help you with your to-do list by giving you another to-do, that's a challenge. And you can so you can work with them to help them understand, okay, how do you delegate effectively so it becomes less of a nightmare. I mean, understand that putting a vision in your resources, what's the definition of done, however you want to structure that. But that's really the challenge that we have with our companies is to help them build projects where it's delegation is not a to-do, it's actually a value add.
So what is that looking like for you? I mean, when you have those conversations with those companies, here's some students, here's a labor pool, you can use them however you like. So how does that work for these companies? Yeah,
so a lot of it is, I mean, one-to-one or one to a few, sort of building the relationship with them, or having Jeffrey come and actually talk to the CEOs, and we recorded that and then share it with everyone that couldn't come to that specific session, about what are the kinds of projects that students can do, what are the skills you can sort of rely on. I will go through and use example projects of our companies that have been successful, and I will show like, here's what a pitch deck looked like. Here's what it looks like now, right? Or here's where we were, here's what it is now. So examples like that really help them sort of visualize it. And I'm still not to the point, like, I mean, upfront, I'm not to the point where they're coming with projects all the time. It's not quite its own thing. I'm still actively working with them to build projects. But just earlier this week, one of our companies reached out and said, hey, I have some marketing projects, can we talk? And they gave me the headline for three projects that I'll write a quick blurb about for them and get out to students. So it's definitely building, it's building a relationship with the businesses directly, and which I admit we have an advantage with because there are portfolio companies. I'm not sure how everybody else would approach that, but that's sort of what we can do.
That's a great example, and I appreciate you sharing. Just this is a new thing for everybody, and there already are small organizations that are juggling a million and one different new things, and so just that coaching. And I know in the chat, Jeffrey shared the website that we built out for CincyTech to just give you some ideas of what are some of these types of projects. And so anyone who's joining us today, if something like that would be a helpful tool for reaching out to companies within your neck of the woods, if you are a university and looking at how can I do this from a small business incubator or working through my Chamber of Commerce, again, happy to collaborate on a one-to-one basis on what that could look like that would address your particular pain point. So thank you. Appreciate, Carl, you sharing that. Paula, I'm curious to know, with the scope of this prestige of the co-op program, what's the word on campus for a micro-internship? We've got something that certainly is helping lots of students, those who are able to be part of this non-tech focused, but you already have this really well-established co-op initiative. So what are some of the reactions from students been? What are some of the value that they are seeing for doing these shorter term, or where do they go after they complete these micro-internship experiences?
And so we would like them to either do another short-term project or leverage the experience they gained with that micro-internship to get a full-time internship or a semester-long part-time internship. Mm-hmm. I think students have valued the experience with the micro-internships. I think for students who are looking for their first experience, I think it's less intimidating to apply for a micro-internship. And so they can build their confidence there and then use that experience again to leverage that for looking for larger projects going forward.
Absolutely. I love 2 points in particular that you said. Is we get a lot of questions around, okay, but where does micro-internships fit in? We already have an internship program. It's not designed to replace anything. It's just designed for especially those early in their academic journey students to build confidence, as you said, gain experience. Or now, I think a lot about the class of 2021. Who in many cases just did not have any experience last summer. Their resumes are going to look a lot like the juniors that now they're in their senior year. And so being able to fit something like this into your schedule, gives them a bit of a life raft, if for those who missed out on that. Teja, again, from your perspective as a student, and that golden opportunity to get that internship last summer, upcoming summer or whatever, but you've got a lot of other things going on during the year. Where do micro-internships fit in? Do they fit in? Is there, from that perspective of being a student?
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the best things of a micro-internship is the flexibility. And being able to do something part-time while, you might be involved in a bunch of organizations on campus, right? And the flexibility of a micro-internship and being able to meet the demands and needs of a small business is honestly satisfying. Also kind of going back to the original point of where you're able to see your impact directly. And I think that flexibility really fuels passion within the students at UC.
Awesome. So, I would love to hear your perspective, especially you, Paula or Carl, with the work that you're doing with these companies, nonprofit associations, but those who are trying to replicate this, a regionally focused ability to spread the word and really directly help students in your local community, as well as nonprofits and other organizations. What advice would you have for a school who's kind of at ground zero but wants to launch something similar to support their communities? Carl, do you want to take it first?
I couldn't tell if he was taking a breath first, so I'll let him go.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
School, so I thought Paula might want to go first from the school perspective, because when I work with the schools, I am not the school.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I will say the funding for us has really helped, because especially with the nonprofits, it's just it's easy for them to say yes to the small project. Other than that, I think just just approaching companies and saying we have this awesome opportunity for you to try a student without biting off an entire internship or co-op. Like I said, again, I think if companies are more, it's a lower level ask, and if they can just get their foot in the door, it would explode from there. I just know it would. And so it just asking them to take a small bite, I think, is an easier approach.
Sure. Not only trying out the concept, but also the whole idea of, could you talk a bit about how easy, difficult, just how is it to implement something like that from the company's perspective? And Teja, please jump in too from your perspective, but the administration and just all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like one of the biggest things that we saw, like when we were launching, when Brainwave was launching up, is we were trying to find clients in order to help. And I feel like a lot of the times, some people don't recognize there's a need. And some people were like, oh, we're fine. We're a very bare bones operation. But then we sent in some of our students. We're like, this is completely free for you. And once we sent them in, they were able to identify several process improvement techniques that, only a fresh set of eyes could have helped with. And I think that was something that was really great to see. And I think that was one of our biggest steps that we were able to take.
Sure. And in terms of just using, the micro-internship platform and kind of the administration of the project, how time consuming, just how is it from an employer's perspective?
It was very easy to launch. I think it took me 2 or 3 emails to Paula and we were good to go. And I think I had a phone call with Jeffrey and we were good to go. And I think that was one of the best things too, is how seamless it was. 3 emails is not a lot of time. And I think that was really great to be able to launch that program so quickly and make an impact within our community.
Sure.
On that, Kristin, if I can say, I did the paperwork for our first handful of projects last in 2019, and we would not have hit the 50 mark this year without there's just no way. The paperwork, without that back end support, it just wouldn't have been possible.
I appreciate you saying that. So, what about the paperwork, and I guess what are we offloading for smaller organizations like you, Carl?
The paperwork and the record management. You're offloading the payroll payment, collecting W-9s. If you have NDA problems, that's covered, any contract. So the way our process works is there would be a consulting contract, and you have with that you have your NDA, then you have to do the W-9, then we have to 1099 them at the end of the year if they've done over some. So it's just you sort of centralize it, and that's great. But sure. I can also take a stab at some things for the replication question,
please,
Dave. So I think a couple of things I would add on top of what they said from the Paula and Teja said from their perspective is that if you want to replicate with, like, if you're a school working on it and you want to focus on sort of small businesses, I can't talk about the big businesses, is focus on sort of simplifying their process for identifying project needs. So for example, Jeffrey, I think put in the chat the link to the CincyTech featured page where it's just, here are some example projects that I know our companies can use. And so I use that when I'm demonstrating to them. Now I still manage all the project posting at this time. I'm going to get away from that eventually, but I still use that to start the conversation, and they see that data cleansing or data collection, or they see quick SWOT analysis, and just sparks something, right? So I think that's important. And again, goes back to that question of like the delegation, that you want to take away to-dos from them. So if you can provide as much of the project needs as possible, and from that perspective, you might say, okay, where do we have some strong students that we know are interested in this, and around certain projects, and you build a bit of a capability around a set of core projects that you think you can do repeatedly, and you go build those out, and you get a few of those good momentum going before you start expanding. So we started kind of broad, like whatever project you wanted, and then okay, we had some good ones, some bad ones. Then we said, okay, no, we're going to focus on, okay, we're going to do some market research. We're going to do some ones that we know we have strong students for, and that then has allowed us to expand even quicker than what we were doing before, right? Because we built the momentum, right? So I think those things would help a lot for somebody looking to expand, as well as I mean, depending on, I don't know what city you're in, but if there is a VC or a some sort of startup, I mean, aggregation point, or small business, a regional chamber, some sort of small business aggregation point, go build the relationship with them, right? Because each small business doesn't have, like my startups don't have, they don't all have HR people that can go recruit students. So we as an aggregation point, we simplify that process for them to engage with the students. And same thing with the students who are all interested in small business or startup stuff. We are now an aggregation point for them as well. So we're sort of helping create, simplifying the process for both parties to engage with each other, without them having to go build 10 different relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when you go, Carl, to these small businesses and say, hey, we have this thing for you, what are some of the biggest value adds that these small businesses tend to, that really seems to resonate? So if I was, you know, a career services person or a Chamber of Commerce representative or what have you, and I wanted the script to, you know, what would you say, you know, is the biggest aha moments for them?
I don't know if I can give you the script just because it changed so much based on who I'm talking to. Like, I mean, they're all individual relationships for me. But I can tell you, so feedback-wise, yes, you get the awesome work, you get the loved working with them, you get the so glad, like the so happy to work with them. But the thing that stood out the most is how excited the founders or the CEOs that have worked with our students are just to have that relationship with the student, and to give back, whether it's through these projects. We also do projects in the classroom as well. So to them, it's this opportunity to give back and be a bit of a mentor, even if it's for a short project. Because at least with us, when a student works for us in one of our companies, they're not actually, like, I'm there as a facilitator, but they have one-to-one conversations with the CEO or C-suite level person with our startups, or one of our managing directors at CincyTech if they're working on one of those projects. So I think they get to build that relationship. So you might also say, I mean, you can build it as a networking thing. If you go to a portfolio of experiences with 10 companies, you have 10 different relationships. One internship. You really only have one relationship. So just all my thoughts there.
Okay, so lots of different pain points that it could address, and not, I think your point about, it kind of fits lots of different shoes or needs or whatever, which every small business is different, every nonprofit is different, every student is different and is looking for something that, where it could all fit in. I got a really interesting question, though, from one of the attendees, and it's actually a student who's joining us. So how do we address the issue of employers possibly taking advantage of micro-internships and using them as a way to get students to do short-term, low-wage labor rather than offering something that's longer or more substantive types of experiences? So would any of you care to tackle that perspective? Maybe the value of micro-internships, where this could fit in, and just the egalitarian perspective from a student, or for a student.
I'm going to jump in and say I've worked with nearly 300 students, or 230 students, sorry, since the last summer. And I haven't had one student contact me and say that they've had a bad experience at one of the companies they've worked with this past year. So I think that's pretty good.
That's a good success rate. I'll take 230 out of 230. But and how about, like, in terms of the scale, the fact that it is a short-term project, it's not the 10, 12-week internship, the value of that shorter-term experience. And, I think that's also maybe a concern from the person who's asked the question.
So just to rephrase the question, so what's the value of these short-term projects for the student?
I think that's part of part of where they're going with it.
In the chat, there's thinking about how do you address the issue of employers possibly taking advantage of the micro-internships. So from the value of the student perspective, at least as I see it, and I kind of reiterating myself, that as I mentioned, so that portfolio of experiences that you can build, and so it's almost a build your own internship approach. Especially if you think of if you're going full time in a semester, you might not be able to do a full internship, but you do have light weeks, and you can sort of fit in some project work there. You then also have the benefit of building, like, seeing multiple different companies, potentially building multiple relationships. So it's a networking benefit. And it also, because these are low risk projects, I mean, the companies know they're not hiring you for an internship. There's not a 10-step internship interview process. It's a chance for you to say, okay, I'm not actually sure this is where I'm interested in, but let me take a short project in that area, right?
Yep.
10-hour project. Let me expand my horizons, because most students, I remember, right? I mean, we have very limited, very narrow understanding of what we can really do once we graduate. And so these projects really give you an opportunity to expand that. And as I mentioned, like with the liberal arts students, to go do a market research project, it's a great opportunity for them to see what can you actually use your skill set for. On the how do you address the potential for taking advantage, I don't know if Paula has some thoughts there. I would say that I don't know if there's anything specific you can do. We have a policy ourselves where $15 is per hour, but what we estimate the hours of each project, but we have a policy ourselves that we will pay a minimum of $15 an hour. So I think that the students just have to be aware of what is being offered for what work. And if you find that there's a company consistently trying to take advantage of your students, I don't know what the policy is, but I would say you not direct your students to go work with them.
Yeah, and that's actually something that we vet individually on the platform. Yeah, that's one reason too that there's other definitions of micro-internships or short-term projects and so on. And one thing that's just fundamentally important to us here at Parker Dewey is the fact that every single project is paid. That's just something that we fundamentally think is the most fair way to go, because I don't know about anyone else, but I don't really like doing work that I'm not getting paid for. And who has time for that, especially students? And that also closes the door for so many students who just can't do unpaid work because they don't have whatever, they got to get paid for their time. They're already working, or they're, whatever their situation is. So that's something that we very carefully vet for. Carl, you mentioned $15 an hour. The projects on our platform typically are in that $15 to $20 range, sometimes a bit higher, sometimes just a bit lower, but it's all paid with a fixed fee, so the student can see up front what the scope of the project is, what the deliverable is going to be, what the timeline is, and how long it's roughly expected for the student to take, so they can then determine, yep, this is something that, at least from the get-go, is something that I am interested in and feel comfortable and confident that I'd be able to do. It's worth my time financially. They see all that up front so that they can then self-select too that that's going to be a good fit. So. But yeah, I really appreciate it. That was a good question. I'm looking through the chat, and I'm not seeing anything that I don't believe has been addressed, but please, anyone who's joining us in our last couple of minutes, if there's any additional questions, please make sure you send them to the chat just so that we can address all of those. But Paula, Carl, Teja, I'd love to hear if there's any outstanding piece of advice or other insights that we have not addressed at this point that might be helpful for our audience.
So back to that replication question, another thing I thought of is that I think it's a really important, if you're interested in doing this, it's important for the career services to really be supporting it and not always be pushing things to the traditional internship, especially again, working with the small business and startups where I get asked all the time, well, do you have an internship? Well, no, I don't. I mean, I don't know if I have an internship for the summer, but here's some project work that we might have in the next 3 months. If you're interested, here's my email list. I will be happy to let you know. And when the career services and or faculty who are involved directly with the students buy into that, then it's a lot easier to buy into the student. I'm doing it for the student to get buy-in as well.
That's a really great point. And I love the fact that you're talking about, yep, the staff, the faculty, everybody has a stake in ensuring students' success. So this is a great way to directly support students, but also to go back and talk to those smaller organizations, small businesses, nonprofits, et cetera, everything that's going on economically in your local community where it can create a really nice win-win. I know one question that's come through is around how can we help students be as successful as possible? And, Cincinnati, you guys have done it, have figured out, have cracked that code between Carl's work with smaller organizations and really building those relationships with local community or with local universities and fostering faculty and career services to identify and help reach students. And then of course your network of small businesses that you're directly working with. And then Paula and Teja with the Servit program and working with these nonprofit and other smaller organizations to really try to foster these experiences. Paula, you mentioned funding, and I know a lot of questions that we get around that is, okay, we have funding, how could we use it? And one idea could be, yes, you could go build out and sponsor X number of internship programs for X number of students. Micro-internships, though, can you think of an advantage perhaps of those shorter term experiences and kind of the breadth of students and where that could fit in and how you could kind of crunch the numbers a little bit differently?
Right. If you have a set amount of money and you want to maximize it to the most students, I think the micro internships are the way to go. That way you can spread it out more. Another way is to partner with the work study office and offset the 25% that isn't paid by the work study funding. We've done that as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, trying to stretch those dollars because they're so hard to come by. Yeah.
They're hard to come by, and there's so many students that are hurting.
Yeah.
And so, not to replace any longer term experience, we want them to have those, but in the interim, that this can, certainly help lots and additional students. I'm just trying to look through to make sure that we have addressed every other question. Teja, you've been a little bit quiet on in terms of all the questions here, so want to make sure you've given an opportunity if there's any final perspective from your experience working the platform as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the biggest things, I cannot emphasize enough, the flexibility and also the seamlessness of using Parker Dewey. From the contracts that are already written, from the W-9, the benefits from the accounting department that are taking care of everything for us. I think that's honestly amazing for us. Now we can focus more on the client side of things. And I think you guys help us a lot.
We appreciate that. And again, really wanted to thank every single one of you who, sharing your experience, and really excited to see all that's going on in Cincinnati and all the students that have been benefiting, whether you're attending University of Cincinnati, whether you're attending Xavier, NKU, Miami. There's just a lot of universities in the area that really are directly benefiting from this. And so excited to continue to work with each one of you. And thank you so much for your time and perspective. Those of you who joined us for today's conversation, if I missed your question, I sincerely apologize. We will be sharing a recap of this conversation as well as the link to the recording later on today. So please feel free to keep the conversation rolling. If there's additional questions or ways that we can help, that's exactly what we're here for, is very much students first and really trying to create that bridge between college to career and make it as egalitarian and fair as possible. So to that end, again, really appreciate everyone's perspective and time, and wish you all a great rest of your afternoon and week. And again, really appreciate our panelists, and thank you again.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you so much.